And again, welcome to the Learning Letterpress. Our guest today is Terry Schupach-Gordon. Terry is a co-founder at Catbird on the Yadkin Press. She is a multi-dimensional artist, but most notably for today, a printmaker, a book artist, a storyteller, a co-director, and an advocate for disability issues. She resides in Shoals, North Carolina, which is where her press is located. She is passionate about bookmaking and the role of books in the transfer of knowledge and the human experience. So with that, thank you so much for joining us, Terry, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, so I'm going to start by, for those of you who I don't know, and for those of you I do, you may have heard some of these stories, but I'm going to talk a little bit about how I came to printmaking and letterpress, because I think how you come to something affects what you find there, what you do with it, and what you have to offer. So when I was about 48 years ago, I'm dating myself, absolutely, I was 20 years old, and I was in college. The Vietnam War was going on, and I had decided, against some advice from other people who knew how involved I was in the arts, that I needed to do something that would really change the world. No more hunger, no more children with disabilities not getting what they needed. You know, I needed to do something in a helping field. And I had a plan. I was going to go there was a program where children who became amputees in Vietnam could, have, new prosthesis, and that was kind of my plan. Well, I contracted a lung disease, and all things changed. I ended up in a hospital in St. Louis, and for about a year, and what happened in the course of that year is that because I couldn't go do the things I had planned, my mother and my dad brought me wood tools, carving things. And for some reason, the hospital was very open to the fact that my bed was covered with wood shavings, and the bathroom was covered with, I did use water-based ink, I will say, at that time. I don't now. But, that's where I rolled up in the bathroom. The bathrooms in hospitals are just great as a roll-up area. If you ever want to, they have a big area around the sink. So that was what I was doing while I was waiting to do other things. On the last day of my time in the hospital, when I did, in fact, get rid of the lung disease, my dad came and he said, there's an exhibit next door that you need to see. And it was at the St. Louis Art Museum. I went next door, and it was an exhibit of Kathy Kolbitz. And so I'm just going to start. Many of you probably know Kolbitz and Kolbitz's prints. There's another one on the wall back here. But I went into that exhibit, and I think of it as I went into that exhibit as someone who is going to be in the helping professions, and I came out of that exhibit a printmaker. And if anyone ever asks me why printmaking, my answer is Kolbitz, because I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that if you wanted to affect the world, you did it with what you loved to do. And there's nothing better than printmaking and letterpress for putting yourself in the thick of how you change the world. So that was my perspective, and that's how I came into printmaking. In the course of learning printmaking and becoming I taught etching and lithography and woodcut long before letterpress. So that is my journey in. But once I found letterpress, I found the same kind of things. Letterpress and printmaking are inherently collective and inherently collaborative process. So I want to start with just a lot of you know this if you're in letterpress, but the beginning, in the early days of letterpress, our leading light in letterpress is Gutenberg. And a lot of people talk about how Gutenberg invented the press. Well, I just always have to begin these talks by saying, no, sorry. He worked on a press that was very like any other press that was around at the time, kind of a modified wine press. But he himself was a goldsmith, and he had kind of three major projects. One was a project to smooth rocks and stones for working. I'm assuming he was working in some kind of jewelry fashion with those. The other was a process to make mirrors, little gold mirrors with the mirrors attached. And his big project was to make these mirrors and sell them to people who were on the pilgrimage to Aachen, where they would see relics of saints, and they would take the mirrors framed in his little gold piece, and it would reflect the power of what they were seeing. Therefore, everybody would get more power. But as luck would have it for him, very much like my encounter with a lung disease, the plague was happening at the time. And the pilgrimage to Aachen, the year that he made all of these tiny little mirrors, and they were not large, they were small, the pilgrimage to Aachen was canceled. So his third idea of what he wanted to do was a punch matrix for making movable, being able to make type so that it was movable. He would pour it, it would be punched down, the letter would be exactly the same size, and voila, the West would have movable type letterpress, as there has been across the globe. There was letterpress in Korea, there was letterpress in China, but it was a material that was not suited to the kind of things that Gutenberg wanted to, or larger productions of books. The early letterpress was made of materials that were fragile, ceramic, things like that, whereas early letterpress was metal. So it would take the weight and the repeated, for those of you who are in letterpress, the repeated moving of the press to get going. Anyway, so that's like a beginning of letterpress, kind of an accident of sorts. Anyway, and then we move on from there. I'm going to try and fit about 500 years in about 35 minutes. So I'm going to go quickly, and if you need to stop me for something, or I am not very tech savvy, as those of you who know me know, but I'm going to hold up these things. We're going to start with, this is a page from the Nuremberg Chronicle. And the Nuremberg Chronicle was the first, and these are, you can find these pages and illustrations of them, and I can send them to you if you want more. I can snap photos of these. These are old. This was made in 1493. And the Nuremberg Chronicle was a collection, a history of the world. And as Koberger, who was the printer, he had a huge print shop. It was about, it was after Gutenberg, but before some of the other larger editions of press. It's a history of the world, and as he has said, it was produced for the pleasure of the information. Unlike the Gutenberg Bible, which was not illustrated, this is a highly illustrated. There are 1,806 illustrations, which is kind of overwhelming when you really think about it. Although I have to say, there were not 1,806 woodcuts to go along this. There were about 640 woodcuts, and they would repeat them. The map of Rome is the same as the map of some other area that was not Rome, but when it was rubricated, it would be, you know, the names of the places in the cities would be written in by the rubricators. And for those of you who are not familiar with some of the letterpress, when a rubricator was the person who would act as very much the way the scribes did before there were letterpress, where they would draw in the red letters or draw in the pilcrow. Pilcrow is a mark which you might have learned in, I used it in, I think, elementary school, but it's the mark for a paragraph or a new thought. It's kind of got a C and then two little lines, and you can see it in, here it is. It's right down here in this part of the, I don't know if you can see that, it was a little red pilcrow, and it was put in by the rubricators. Well, what happened is once these books became very popular, the rubricators couldn't keep up, and so often the pilcrow was just left out, which kind of people believe that it led to our sense of that paragraphs are indented, and the pilcrow kind of became less important as a marker in early language, which I love that. I love the accidents that happen all over the print. This is again from the Nuremberg Chronicle, and you can see these are the different leaders. Philip and I can't read all of the people that are here, but they would appear again as someone else. And this book was, while it was, I mean, it was huge and a huge success. It was one of the most popular of illustrated books of the time. The other interesting thing about the group who were producing the Nuremberg Chronicle is that the Vollgemut, who ran the studio, his pupil was Albert Dürer. And so it was, we think Albert Dürer's first job was working with, first job in a large print shop. They had 21 presses, whereas, you know, the Gutenberg, there were only 1 or 2 presses in the building. But this was a huge print shop, and it was a huge effort. This is also, this is a Dürer print here, and I think there's probably too much shine on that, but it is from the Ship of Fools, Sebastian Brandt. And, you know, it's just really exciting when you can think about where artists that you see and that you love got their start as part of a community, you know, and I mean, it is, I keep going back to these words, collective and communal, but anyone who has worked in a print shop knows, even if you work in your print shop by yourself, you need this thing that Dory has done to bring people together, because we work best as a group. The other things that were going on at the time were, there were other printmakers. There were people who did dry point. The earliest dry points that we know of are the Master of the House book. And this is a very small Master of the House book. I love doing these workshops because when I do them, you actually get to hold these prints. And that's my one, I'm so sorry that I can't pass this to you, but this is a very small dry point. And if you know very much about dry point, it can't really be printed with the letterpress because it's on metal, and instead of being able to roll over the top of it, you're printing what is underneath rather than what is on top. It's not planographic. You're printing what is underneath, like an etching. There's some that's on the top, that kind of rough spots on a dry point are printed as well, and they show up as kind of a rough edge, like when you look at a Rembrandt and you see the kind of rough marks on them. But that was one of the processes that were used at the time. the Master of the House book was a little earlier than Gutenberg, and on into, I don't know the dates that he died, but because we're not even 100% sure who he was, but but it was right around the time of the Gutenberg and the Nuremberg Chronicle. This is a very small Georg Pence print. I have another one that is about 2 inches by, I'm gonna put that, see if I can get that any closer. This is an engraving, and engravings are done, for those of you who are not familiar, they are done with this is an engraving tool, kind of a bent and an angled tip. And the work is done, this is just blows me away, by moving the metal into you kind of hold your tool somewhat still, and you move the metal into it, and it creates a burr that rolls up. Every single line, even the writing on this print, are done with this tool. And Pence was an interesting character because he was banished because he was very influenced by the people at the Nuremberg Chronicle who had more of a humanist bent in what they were doing, and he was banished because his work was much more humanist in nature than some of the powers that be wanted it to be. So that was what was going on at the time of the Gutenberg Bible. Does anybody have any questions they want to ask now before I move a couple hundred years back here? Okay. So and the other one more piece that we need to just look at. This is a little bit later, but it is an etching. So etchings were invented roughly 1470s. This is a lot later than that, where a wax ground is put all over the copper. You draw through the wax, it is put in the acid, and it etches below the surface. So it's very similar to an engraving, but the work, as I think you can see with this, is much more fluid. And the thing I love about this particular print, this is in the 1700s, and there were very many women who were involved in printmaking because they worked in the print shop, either because they were connected to the owners of the print shop, they were the daughters, they were the wives, they were themselves the printmakers. And this woman, Maria Katrina Prestel, is she lived in Germany and then eventually moved to England, but was one of the early identified women printmakers who worked in and taught printmaking as she worked in the print shops. Everything in printmaking, it's kind of one of the things that I love so much about printmaking is that it is it's a language of its own. And you get to a point, for those of you who have worked in etching, you get to a point and something isn't working for you, there's always something else, some other way of experimenting that can lead you to different, when your needs change, it can kind of lead you to different ways of doing things. And a lot of the early printmakers were just that kind of, that's how they thought. Blake, for example, was when William Blake was printing, he wanted something where he could print books without setting the type. So he devised a system. He already did wood engravings, but like so many, an early block book, you had to carve all of the words all together on the block so you could print the block and the book and the letters at the same time if you did not want to set the type. Well, he didn't want to do that. So he invented a way of writing with a acid resistant material. And when he put his plate in the acid and etched it for a really long time, he came up with the concept of a relief etching. And so that the letters and the images, they're beautiful plates to see. And if you get a chance, there are places that you can go and watch them be printed, and they're just gorgeous. But they're very deep, so you can really see the relief. And I have an example, and I hope this is visible. This is a plate. So I'm not sure how visible this is going to be. This is a plate that was done by, I do workshops with children, and they draw on the copper, and then we put the plate in the acid and it's etched, and then we roll it because it's rolled as a relief, just as you would roll a woodcut if you're printing it with letterpress, and you can make it type high by setting it on something that lifts it up if you're working with a press. So it's but it opened up a whole nother area of etching to working as a book artist, and just a really exciting way to do things. And then there were people as the time goes on, there were people who were trying to figure out other ways to use the press, other ways to print works that they themselves had done and couldn't find people to print them. For example, in Alois Sinnefelder, who is the inventor of lithography, he was a playwright, obviously not a terribly good playwright, because he was having trouble getting anyone to read or look at his work. So he was trying to figure out something else he could do to make it so that he could print works at his home. He lived in Bavaria, and where they quarry Bavarian limestone. And the story that he writes, whether it's totally true or not, I'm not sure, but he was sitting at his desk and trying to figure out, he tried everything and was not really having much success of ways that he could invent a new method of writing and having the writing transfer to an image. And he had a piece of limestone. This is small, but I'm not going to keep it up very long because it's really heavy. Those of you who do lithography, this is a pumping iron moment here. And you can see this is an older one that has there's a railroad image, and there a little girl here, and these are all different things that can be still printed. But this stone is a piece of Bavarian limestone, about the thickness that he would have had sitting next to him. And for some reason, his mother, this is according to Sinnefelder himself, and Sinnefelder's dates are in the late 1700s, and he was sitting, his mother came in and wanted to make a laundry list. Sinnefelder says this, not me. And so he takes a wax crayon and he writes on the Bavarian limestone. And then he has this epiphany: if I write on the limestone, but keep the part of the limestone, etch the part of the limestone, not to make it lower, but to clean it so that it's water, it attracts water. The waxy part will repel the water. And if I roll that up while keeping it wet, now why this would go through anyone's mind is a whole nother ball of wax, but you can roll it up and you have a printed copy with a lithopress. His first press was actually a press for book binding. That's all he had. So he would roll this up, screw the bookbinding press down on top of it, and take the images off. He teamed up with a musician who was also having trouble having his work accepted and produced in book form. So voila, lithography. And lithography changed so many things. This is a little Guyon print much later, in the 1920s, a lithograph. And, you know, lithographs became a way that where you could use for newspapers, you could use for, there are many, many things that you could print with in lithography, where you could combine the image and the type in ways that you couldn't before with you know, when you're letterpress, all you letterpress people know, you know, most people today don't print a woodcut and the letterpress at the same time. At least most people I know don't. They did at the beginning. They would just bump the woodcut up if it wasn't quite type high enough. And, you know, you can see when you look at early books, sometimes they print well and sometimes they don't, but you know, they're, I mean, I'm not going to argue with anything that was printed in 1493, so that's fine with me. But with lithography, it kind of opened up a whole another dimension, and where which also in Scotland, I believe, in the late in the early part of the 1700s, there was a man named William Geld who had sort of a similar, he was trying to do similar things to Cinefelder. He was trying to print things where the image and the text could be all together. And I just noticed that Brian Allen is somewhere out there. And Brian, you might recognize this because I got it from you. This is a stereotype. And Geld invented what we call stereotype, which is a deep etched piece of copper with letterpress on it. And the letterpress, it was actually, this is a print of it. Thank you, Brian. I use this all the time as a demo of what this is. It is a way when you could set your type and cut your image, put them on the table using the earliest of the stereotypes that were made with wax and then poured with metal. But then they found that they could use paper mache. I love that part because I work as a puppeteer. So paper mache, oh my gosh, paper mache and bookmaking, isn't that exciting? It's, but they would cover it with paper mache, lift it off. This is in 1720s, 1740s, lift it off and press wax into it and then use that wax, seems like a lot of work, but for something that could be printed at the same time. So you could run it off in almost an offset press. And this is another more contemporary. You can see that the letters are here and the image is over here and it's all type high, you know, set on a end grain block to make it type high. And it was just revolutionary because, I mean, you can imagine when you don't have to set quite that much type for that volume of stuff. We have newspapers, we have all of that. Around the same time, newspapers, let's just go. Now that we can do this with and I love the word stereotype. I mean, I just, you know, I love that it is part of the whole, there's so many words that are part of our language as printmakers and letterpress people that you never think about. Of course, the French word is cliche, and it is, isn't it? Anyway, so, but at the same time, here in the United States, the newspaper industry was beginning to boom. And in fact, some people believe that when some of the early taxes were placed on things, the Stamp Act, for example, the Stamp Act in this country was one of the big groups that led the revolts against the Stamp Act were people in letterpress, because with too big of a tax, they can't get their product out. And the other person that is very important, the only woman whose name appears on the Declaration of Independence, many of you probably know this, but is Mary Catherine Goddard, and she was the printer for the second, it was the second version of the the Declaration of Independence, and smart woman that she was, it was the one that had their names letter set beside their signatures, because the first one did not. And so therefore, who could read it? But there you have it. So she, my hero, and she was such a, and she was a printer's printer. I mean, that was not the only thing she did, but it was something that I think a lot of people don't, they think that all letterpress was run by men in the early days, but it was not. And the New York Public Library a number of years ago had a fabulous show on women in printmaking, and they still have an easy to access website with a lot of the images on there, and I highly recommend it. As well as, when we get all finished, I do have books if you're interested in different specific things that might not have, I've got names of books. Since that thumbs went up just after hearing about Mary Catherine, this book, this is so fabulous. 500 Years of Women's Work, the Lisa Unger Paskins collection. This is in Durham, North Carolina. Yay! It is down the street from us whenever we can get out of the house. And we're in a tiny, even tinier than Shoals, we're in a tiny little town called Tobaccoville. So going to Durham is like going to, New York City, it's great. But this is a fabulous book, and all things women connected with printmaking. It's for 500 years. Some of the early convents, I'll just say this because it popped into my mind, before the Gutenberg Bible, there was a convent in Italy where all the scribes, guess who they were? The nuns in this convent. And it was, they had in their little marginal lines as they scripted their manuscripts were references to Pope Joan, of course. And, it was just but it's kind of gotten lost in how we think about the history of printmaking. But that definitely is a book that that has been revolutionary for me. But the other invention, before we get to where we are now, when I do this talk, we usually do it it's about a 2.5 hour thing, and there are prints all over the place, and we break for lunch or a glass of wine in the middle, and then go back to it. So doing this in minutes is, but okay, I can do it. I'm just as locked down as all of you. This is a tiny little print of Kirchner, who, German expressionist, the founder of Die Brücke, which is the bridge. He was born in 1880. He died in 1938. And Kirchner, along with a lot of other German expressionists, had the need to get this information out, the need to be productive, not to sell things in a gallery, but because people needed this work. People needed to know history. They needed to know what was going on. They needed to be moved. They needed to be encouraged. Anyway, so Kirchner was part of this group. He wrote a manifesto. His dad didn't want him to be, unlike my dad, who thought art was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Kirchner's dad thought it was much better if he would go and be an architect. So he went to architecture school, where he met Carl Schmidt-Rottluff and a few other German expressionists who also didn't want to be in architecture school. And while there, in the early 1900s, they found a material in the building. Linoleum had just been invented as a flooring. And the three German expressionists looked at linoleum and said, oh, this is just what we need, because we can cut it quickly. We can cut it for images. We can cut it for text. We can make our manifesto. And if you have never read the manifesto of the Bridge group, the whole thing is fabulous. and it is this gorgeous type, all cut on linoleum. And part of it says, I'm going to read this because if this isn't current, if this doesn't take you to where we are today, I do not know who you are. It says, we call all young people together. And as young people ourselves who carry the future in us, we want to wrest freedom for our actions and our lives from the older and comfortably established forces.
Schupach.
You know, I'm so glad he found that linoleum. And it was such a different material. I hope you can see this because this is a spectacular lino cut by a man named Haseman, Arminius Haseman. He's German. And you can, when you see this close, you can see the tool bending as it's used. You can't do that in wood because wood is not linoleum. Your wood would break your tool. But this is just such a, he did a lot of work that kind of reminds me, I mean, I can almost hear the Threepenny Opera in the background. You know, it's got that, you know, just of his time movement. And this was one of my dad's favorite prints in the world. So I love this. And it's a man on it. I don't know if you can see the tightrope that's under here. But when I was a child, you know, this is a side story, has nothing to do with what we're talking about exactly. But when I was a child, I thought the word tightrope was type-rope, T-Y. And I said it that way my whole life. And it wasn't until I was doing one of these talks that somebody said, do you mean tightrope? And I thought, oh my God, you know, anyway, so I guess printmaking was always in my my blood. All right, so I'm going to go quickly to where we are today. Michael, you may recognize this little red book right here. Stella, you might. I'm looking at names who might recognize this little red book. This little book is Anne Tracy, a fabulous printmaker, and she works with children now. But it is etched, but printed relief. It's a deep etched image, printed relief, and it is Cock Robin, the death of Cock Robin. This is the death of Cock Robin printed at the time of the stereotype, and it was the one of the early stereotypes, and you can always tell, because in this book there are pages where, let's see if I can find the page. Yes, this page right here in Cock Robin. You can see that they've got the entire image askew, and it's not just the image and these askew from each other. They're both askew because they're both on the same, because they're a stereotype. So this little Cock Robin, and here is Cock Robin. And I like to start talking about the present, because we cannot be in the present without taking the past with us. And our past as printmakers, our past as letterpress is so exciting. And it's, so having said that, as I'm gonna pull up a few more images before I see if you have questions again. I wanted to, one of the things that this is a print of mine. And the reason I'm bringing this one up is because the plate I showed you before, that the children at the where I work with kids did, is in the back of this, and it is printed as a William Blake. There, you know, honestly, and this has a little bit of an old. This is a transferred image. I'm not a book terror upper. I just can't quite do that. So this is a transferred image that is etched on this side, which was a, it has dates. It was just a collection of books. This is from a book. I did a book, I think I have it over here, on, the Gwendolyn Brooks poem, Infirm, which is a fabulous poem. and so pieces of that are part of the book and part of the image, and that's kind of why I bring that one here. I will just bring a few more things out, and then I'm going to stop and see if you have questions. This book, Roy, you probably recognize this. This is a book. It's called Puppets One Ought to Know. It's a accordion book, little woodcuts of puppets from puppet theaters around the world. And since I landed on Ashley Bryan, who is also a printmaker and a puppeteer, someday I want to do one of these, and it would be, my topic would be printmakers and letterpress people who are also puppeteers, because I'm telling you, there's lots. Some of you may know the letterpress person, his first D.W. Dwiggins. If you're familiar, there are certain typefaces that he did. He was a puppeteer also. He had a marionette theater, you know, and Alfred Jarry was a puppeteer, and I'm trying not to get lost. Paul Clay was a puppeteer. This is one of his, you know, so it's sort of, when you go to books, again, it's that collective, you bring everything with you. And one of the things I think I love is I remember when I was in school, I was at Indiana University, and my printmaking teacher said to me, you know, one day you're going to have to choose one of these things that you love. And I thought, you know, okay, fine. I'll do that later. And fortunately, I never did it, because all of these things are related. You know, a puppet theater is inherently collective. Book and letterpress is inherently collaborative. They're all the same in some manner and feed each other in some way. So I'm just gonna, since it's kind of hard to see the images, I am gonna just pull one more. Because we haven't talked about paper, and I need to just say how important that was. I'm not gonna, this is the cover. Oh good, it's pretty visible on my end. This is the cover of a hand printed book, Telegraphica. Some of you may know this group. I have another one of theirs that is it has little candelabra to set out in front, so when you're reading the book, you can light your candles. I mean, you need that, right? It's just amazing. And it's but this book is, the front cover and the box is all handmade paper. And it's, on the inside, it is letterpress, which it's too small really for you to see, and a few images of it. But the thing about, that I need to say, and it's gonna take me back to the beginning, how connected all of these things are. You know, we don't think about it very much, but at the time of the Gutenberg Bible, there were 30,000 books in Europe. 50 years later, there were millions, 50 years later. And part of that was the fact that the paper mills, and the fact that they were not using vellum, which takes, like, I mean, it takes 5,000 cows to make 30 Bibles. You're just not gonna make quite as many if you have to go through that. But the first paper mill in Europe was in 1120. And then in Germany, the first paper mill was right about 50 years before the Gutenberg Bible was produced. I think of that, no paper mills, you know, and it made such a huge difference, not only because it's far easier to print on paper than it is to print on vellum, let alone the fact that it's far easier to make it than to make the vellum that you would be printing on. And so, you know, I mean, I think all of those things have to happen at the same time. And again, it kind of underlines for me the collectivity of this thing we're all involved in. And, you know, I want to leave time to say some of the books, because there are a couple that you really, if you love this, you really need these books. But I did want to say also one of my favorite writers about books is Robert Bringhurst. And for those of you who, one of the things that Robert, this is a little book called The Solid Form of Language. And in this book, he says, he's talking about language, and he says language, and I would expand that and say printmaking or letterpress is not just what we speak, but it is what speaks us. Mm. And to me, it's like, that's why we're all here, because this is a medium that speaks us. Anyway, so that's the end of that part. And do you want me to name some of the books, or do you have questions right away?
Terry, I think that would be really helpful. And there was a question in the chat. What was the Taller Graphica name again? The book with the face on it?
It's, they are, I'm going to spell it. My, I may be the only letterpress person who has spelling anxiety but maybe not. But it's, I believe I can get it. This is called Incantations by Mayan Women. And it is, they're in Mexico. I'm looking for how to spell it. It's T-A-L-L-E-R. Second word is L-E-N, and it has a tilde like thing over the end. A-T-E-R-O-S, and it's in Chiapas. And the other little piece of theirs is a house. It's the book resides in a house. There are 3 books, and then you open it, and then the little candelabras come out. Oh, I love their work. It's just beautiful. And okay, so on to books. Books and more books. Okay, for you typographers here, Typographical Firsts is a fun book. It kind of goes, I love this book because if you're like me, I could start and end up on Mars if I'm not careful with like the tangents that I get involved with. But this is nice because it selects a limited number of typographical firsts and tells you about them. Mm-hmm. And it's wonderful. It's written by John Boardley, B-O-A-R-D-L-E-Y. And it is published by, published at the Bodleian Library and in Oxford, and the subtitle is Adventures in Early Printing. So it is exactly, if you love early printing, it is a book for you. This and his other book, I read the other one first. This is just called The Book, a cover-to-cover exploration of the most powerful object of our time. But I read his other book, which is called Shady Characters, about punctuation. And I promise you, it is one of the best books you've ever read. It's, you know, I mean, everything from how writing, you know, writing used to be, you would start here, go this way, and come back like you're plowing a field. And it was called that word for plowing a field. You know, as you write, it explains why we have a period where we have a period and a comma where we have a comma, and the Pilcrow. It has a whole chapter on the Pilcrow. So if you love that kind of thing, Keith Houston's Shady Characters and The Book are 2 wonderful, wonderful books. And he has an exhaustive suggestions in the back for books that most of which, I mean, the rest of my life could be in the back of that book. But he's wonderful. He's fun. He's, you know, he isn't afraid to, he and Robert Bringhurst are friends, and they've done one lecture series together, and they have some disagreements, which is really fun, but they usually mention Bringhurst thinks this, but I think this. And Bringhurst is quite the typographer. So anything Robert Bringhurst is fabulous. If you're interested in women at the press, It's called Paths to the Press, Printmaking and American Women Artists, 1910 to 1966, no, 1960. Guess who that is on the cover? That's Wanda Gog. You know, thousands of cats and hats and all. Wanda Gog, oh my gosh. Anyway, pulling her press. It is, there is also a book, I haven't got it here because I loaned it to someone, on the Koala Press, which is the press run by William Butler Yeats's sisters, Lily Yeats, and oh my goodness. You know, again, they ran the press. Yeats himself supplied some of the poetry, as well as other people, and Yeats's brother did some of the woodcuts. They both, the sisters, worked with William Morris doing embroidery, and went from embroidery to books. So I'm not the only one that gets sidetracked with other loves of many things. Let's see, I think there was one other book I was gonna mention, and I can't think of it right now, and it's not sitting here. So anyway, so those are some books, and does anybody have any questions? Or
Terry, I'll just say, if you think about it later, let me know and I'll add it into the show notes on YouTube. So we can always add that extra book if you find it.
Yes, I will. I certainly will.
So any questions? If you have one, please make sure that you unmute yourself so that we can hear you when you're speaking.
Could you say something about the many different kinds of papers that you found and used? Where did those all come from? I know you've mentioned paper from Japan and other places.
Yes, okay, since you asked, I'll get a couple more books out. Okay, yeah, the books, the cover of this book, and you'll recognize this, Roy, because it's the cover of the book that we just did. We did a book, Roy is a poet, among other things. He's also a really great puppeteer from way back. He won't tell you that, but I will. So he, we did a book called, what is it called? A Constellation of Collective Nouns. And it is a book of just animals that are collective nouns. We were talking about being collective in our lockdown. So that's what we did during the pandemic. The cover of that book is this. It's a Canadian book paper maker, Saint Armand. Those of you who make books, you have to know this paper. Is one of the most beautiful papers I've ever seen before, since this is a cover paper, but there are inside papers that are equally beautiful. This paper is from Mexico. This paper has little wood chips in it. Let's see, what else have we got in here? There's a little etching on the inside of that. And some letterpress. But the Kitakata is my favorite paper to print on for woodcuts. And that paper, Kitakata, is from Japan. Just a gorgeous paper. This paper, the centerpiece, this is from the book, the Gwendolyn Brooks poem about we are all infirm, is the concept of the book, and enough. Infirm and enough. But the paper is called Akatoshi, and it is a very thin, you wouldn't think, I think some of the book, the collective nouns are printed on Akatoshi. It's very brown, very transparent, and beautiful for both letterpress and for etching. It's so receptive that I don't know if you can see this, but see the green in that? I needed something behind this, and someone that we had worked with, who is just a fabulous poet, was working in our studio, and she needed a cloth behind a piece of, behind something. And I said, oh, let's pick up this piece of cloth. We picked up the cloths, we rolled it up with green ink and printed it on the paper. And this paper is so receptive that everything printed, even the little fringes at the bottom. So next time we did a book and we used that as well. So but they're from all over the place. But honestly, for you printmakers, and you go find St. Armand, they have a series of papers called Old Masters that are thin but exquisite. And for letterpress, oh my gosh. But even the thick ones for letterpress, this is a very, very thick St. Armand. You can feel the embossing of that, of the letterpress that's on there. But it's crisp and it's clean and it's, you know, it's all those things. St. Armand, it's in Montreal. So and they're very, they have a couple open houses every, you know, where you can go and see it. When maybe we'll all meet there next time.
That would be lovely.
So there you go. But
thanks for your question, Mr. Weber. Any other questions from the group? Okay, well, we'll go ahead and wrap up. It's right in an hour, so perfect timing anyway, Terry. This has been such a wonderful opportunity to visit with you. Thank you so much for sharing your collection and your knowledge with us. Well,
thank you all for loving letterpress and books and prints. We need each other so much. So yes. Thank you. And Stella, it's so good to see you. I just like that popped up and I thought, oh my gosh, that's Stella. Good.
That's so great. Well, thank you. Thank you. If you are interested in viewing this recording or sharing it, I usually try and post it on the Learning Letterpress YouTube page within about a week. If you have any questions, please feel free to shoot me an email. My email is hello@sidetrackpress. And if it's directed at Terry and you don't already know Terry, I'll be happy to help connect you guys so that you can ask any bibliography questions or paper questions or just get to know her a little bit more because it's really delightful. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you guys for being there.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Sally.
Hey, thank you. Thanks, Terry.